One of the most limiting beliefs humanity has ever accepted is the idea that reality began here at a specific moment, in a specific form, confined to what we can see, measure, and remember. This assumption is rarely questioned because it is presented as common sense. History begins with recorded events. Reality begins with matter. Existence begins with birth. Everything before that is labeled myth, speculation, or fantasy. And once that framework is accepted, curiosity stops at the boundary it creates. But boundaries created by belief are not natural, they are psychological. When people are taught that reality has a clear beginning, they instinctively stop looking beyond it. They stop asking what came before, what exists outside, or what continues beyond. A beginning implies an origin point that feels complete. It suggests that everything meaningful starts here, making anything beyond unnecessary or irrelevant. This belief is comforting because it simplifies existence. A reality with a beginning and an end feels manageable. It can be measured, controlled, and explained. It allows systems to define meaning, purpose, and value within narrow limits. But simplicity often comes at the cost of truth. And the cost of this particular assumption is enormous. Across cultures and eras, the idea of a single beginning is surprisingly recent. Ancient civilizations spoke not of origins, but of cycles, not of creation from nothing, but of transitions between states. Reality was seen as layered, recurring, and continuous. Worlds rose and fell. Ages came and went. Nothing truly began, and nothing truly ended. It changed form. This understanding did not arise from ignorance. It arose from observation and experience passed down through generations. The modern insistence on a fixed beginning did not emerge because it was proven it emerged because it was useful. A defined beginning allows for defined authority. It establishes a timeline that can be owned, taught, and enforced. When people believe this is the first and only version of reality, fear becomes easier to manage. Loss feels absolute. Death feels final. Endings feel catastrophic. And fear, once embedded, shapes behavior more effectively than force ever could. What is rarely discussed is how this belief shapes identity. If reality began here, then you began here. Your awareness is temporary. Your existence is accidental. Your meaning must be constructed externally. That narrative makes individuals dependent on systems for purpose and validation. It disconnects people from any sense of continuity beyond physical form. Yet something about this never fully settles. People experience moments of deep familiarity, recognition without memory, and a sense that existence feels older than their bodies. These experiences are dismissed as imagination because they do not fit the beginning base model. But dismissing them does not make them disappear. It only pushes them into the background. The unsettling possibility is this: the idea that reality began here may not be an explanation, it may be a limitation, a mental boundary designed to keep perception contained. Because if reality did not begin here, then it does not end here either. And that realization would change how people relate to fear, control, and existence itself. This chapter does not tell you what came before. It does something more dangerous. It removes the assumption that nothing did. Once that assumption dissolves, reality becomes far larger, deeper, and less predictable than we were taught. If reality did not begin here, then history is not the start of the story. It is a chapter written after something else already existed. And that changes everything that follows. Across the ancient world, a striking pattern appears again and again. Civilizations did not describe reality as beginning, but as continuing. They spoke of worlds before this one, ages that rose and fell, and civilizations lost not to myth, but to time. These were not isolated stories or cultural fantasies. From India's yugas to the Mayan cycles, from Egyptian dynasties of the gods to Greek ages of man, the same idea repeats. This reality is not the first, and it will not be the last. What makes this unsettling is the consistency. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia describe similar structures, recurring ages, resets, transitions, and catastrophes that marked the end of one world and the beginning of another. These were not framed as absolute endings, but as passages. Something ended, something continued, memory survived in fragments, stories, symbols, rituals, and warnings. Modern thinking dismisses these accounts as metaphor or mythology, but that dismissal avoids an uncomfortable question. Why would so many civilizations invent the same idea? Myths usually differ wildly across cultures, yet the concept of a before is remarkably aligned. Different names, different imagery, same underlying message. Reality moves in cycles. Civilizations rise, collapse, and are forgotten. What remains is not matter, but memory. Ancient records often describe previous ages as more advanced, more connected, or more aligned with the cosmos. This contradicts the modern narrative of linear progress, where humanity is always becoming more intelligent and more advanced. Instead, ancient cultures seem to believe knowledge could be lost as easily as it was gained. That belief alone suggests lived experience, not imagination. There are also physical remnants that do not sit comfortably within official timelines, structures, whose precision, scale, or astronomical alignment imply knowledge far beyond what is attributed to their era. These anomalies are explained away individually, never collectively. The idea that they may be echoes of a prior reality is considered too disruptive to pursue seriously. The concept of before also appears in human consciousness itself. People experience deep intuition, déjà vu, and a sense of familiarity with things they have never learned. These experiences are brushed aside as psychological quirks, yet they align disturbingly well with the ancient idea that awareness outlasts worlds, that something remembers even when history does not. Ancient civilizations did not fear this idea. They respected it. Knowing that worlds end changes how a civilization lives. It encourages humility, long-term thinking, and reverence for balance. It also weakens fear of endings. If reality is ended before and continued, then collapse is not annihilation, it is transition. This is why the idea of before quietly disappeared. A civilization taught that this is the only world behaves very differently from one that knows it is a phase. Finality breeds urgency, fear, and obedience. Cycles breed patience, responsibility, and perspective. Systems built on control do not benefit from perspective. This chapter is not claiming ancient cultures knew everything. It is claiming they remembered something essential, that reality does not start with us, and forgetting that truth has consequences. If there was a before, then history is incomplete. If worlds have ended before, then endings are not the threat we think they are. And if memory survives transition, then identity may be far deeper than biology. Ancient civilizations did not ask how reality began. They asked how to live, knowing it never truly ends. And that question may be returning. What makes the idea that reality did not begin here truly disturbing is that modern science is beginning to echo what ancient civilizations always implied, that the world we experience is not the foundation of existence, but a layer built upon something deeper. This realization has not arrived through dramatic announcements or philosophical debates, but through quiet contradictions in physics that refuse to go away. The more precisely scientists study reality, the less solid it appears. At the smallest scales, matter dissolves into probability. Particles are no longer objects, but tendencies. Location becomes uncertain, time behaves strangely, space loses its independence. Reality, once thought to be a collection of solid things moving through empty space, now looks more like an interface, a structured appearance arising from underlying processes that cannot be directly observed. Modern physics increasingly suggests that space and time are not fundamental. They emerge, they are produced by deeper structures, relationships, or informational frameworks. Some theories propose hidden dimensions beyond perception. Others suggest reality behaves like a projection or simulation, where what we experience is not the source code but the output. These ideas are no longer fringe speculation. They are serious attempts to explain why reality behaves the way it does. The shock is not that science is imagining exotic possibilities. The shock is that it is being forced to classical explanations no longer work. The universe does not behave like a machine built from independent parts. It behaves like a system where everything is connected beneath the surface, where separation is an illusion created by scale and perception. This is where the idea of a beginning collapses. If space and time emerge from something deeper, then the beginning of space-time is not the beginning of reality. It is the beginning of a phase, a transition from one state into another. The universe may not have begun, it may have changed form. This aligns disturbingly well with ancient descriptions of cycles, ages, and resets. Not metaphorical resets, but structural transitions where one version of reality gives way to another. Science does not use the same language, but the pattern is familiar. Reality is not fixed. It evolves, reorganizes, and possibly repeats. What science avoids discussing openly is what this implies about identity and consciousness. If reality is emergent, then awareness may not be generated by it. Consciousness may be more fundamental than matter, not less. Matter may be the expression of something deeper rather than the source of everything. This idea is often treated as philosophical rather than scientific, yet it sits at the center of the mystery science cannot solve. Why does anything exist at all? Why does reality have structure? Why does awareness accompany it? These questions point beyond the physical universe. And once you follow them far enough, the idea that reality began here feels increasingly incomplete. This chapter is unsettling because it reveals a convergence. Ancient memory and modern science, approaching from opposite directions, arrive at the same implication. What we call reality is not the beginning. It is a surface, a temporary configuration, a chapter, not the book. If science is right, then reality did not begin with matter. If ancient civilizations were right, then reality did not begin with us. And if both are pointing in the same direction, then the real mystery is not what happens at the end of the universe, but what happens when this layer gives way to the next. Because if reality has changed before, it can change again. And whatever lies beyond that change is not something humanity invented, it is something humanity has always been inside. If reality did not begin here, then consciousness almost certainly didn't either. This is the realization that unsettles people the most because it challenges the deepest assumption of all that awareness is born with the body and ends with it. Modern culture treats consciousness as a byproduct of biology, something generated by neural activity and extinguished at death. Yet this explanation, repeated so often it feels unquestionable, leaves too many gaps to ignore. Consciousness behaves unlike anything else in the physical world. It cannot be located in space, it does not degrade with use, it does not divide when shared. And most importantly, it does not obey the same rules as matter. Damage the brain and perception changes, but change is not proof of origin. A broken receiver distorts the signal, but the signal may still exist independently. Across cultures and throughout history, humans have described awareness as something that enters the body rather than something created by it. The body was seen as a vessel, a temporary interface. Birth was not the beginning of consciousness, but its arrival into form. Death was not the end, but a departure. These ideas were not fringe beliefs, they were foundational. Even today, people experience moments that do not align with the idea of newly created awareness, deep recognition without memory, a sense of continuity beneath personality, or the feeling that existence is older than the body inhabiting it. These experiences are dismissed because they do not fit the material narrative, yet they are remarkably consistent across cultures and individuals. What makes this chapter unsettling is how modern science struggles with consciousness. Despite extraordinary advances in neuroscience, no one can explain how subjective experience arises from physical matter. Correlations are observed, mechanisms mapped, but the hard problem remains untouched. How does electrical activity produce awareness? Why is there something it feels like to exist at all? Some scientists quietly admit that consciousness may be fundamental, not produced by reality, but participating in it. If this is true, then awareness did not begin with biology. Biology became a way for awareness to express itself within this layer of reality. Consciousness would be older than matter, older than time as we experience it. This aligns with ancient accounts of cycles and transitions. If worlds change and realities reset, what carries continuity? Matter breaks down, civilizations disappear, histories are erased. But consciousness awareness itself may persist, moving through forms rather than ending with them. This idea explains why endings feel wrong at a deep level. Humans fear death, not just because of survival instinct, but because something in us senses continuity. Finality feels imposed, not natural. The idea that everything simply stops conflicts with an intuition that predates language. If consciousness did not begin here, then identity is not confined to this lifetime. That does not mean memory carries over in neat narratives. Memory may fragment, personality may dissolve, but awareness, the core sense of being, may remain. This realization is dangerous to systems built on fear of endings. If awareness continues, then urgency loses power. Compliance based on finality weakens. People begin to live with longer perspective, deeper responsibility, and less desperation. This chapter does not claim certainty. It removes a restriction. It suggests that consciousness may not be as fragile or temporary as we were taught. And once that idea is allowed, the entire story of beginnings and endings shifts. If consciousness did not start here, then this reality is not your origin. It is a chapter you are passing through, and that realization prepares you for the final, most unsettling truth that what we call the end may not be destruction at all, but transition. That is where the story must go next. The idea of an ending has always carried more power over human behavior than any beginning, and that is not accidental. An end implies finality, and finality creates urgency. Urgency creates fear, and fear is one of the most effective tools for shaping obedience, compliance, and control. When people are taught that reality ends here, that this life, this world, this moment is all there is, they become far easier to pressure, rush, and manipulate. The fear of losing everything concentrates attention on survival rather than understanding. Throughout history, endings have been framed as catastrophes rather than transitions. Collapse, death, judgment, extinction, these narratives dominate cultural imagination. Rarely is an ending presented as a passage or a transformation. This framing matters because it trains the mind to cling to the present at all costs. When the present feels like the only reality, people will defend it even when it harms them. Ancient cultures did not share this fear in the same way. For them, endings were built into the structure of reality. Ages ended, worlds shifted, civilizations fell and were remembered as part of a larger cycle. Endings were not failures, they were movements. This perspective did not remove responsibility. It expanded it. Knowing that worlds end encourages balance, foresight, and humility. Knowing that nothing truly ends removes panic. Modern culture reversed this understanding. By presenting reality as linear and final, endings became terrifying. Death became absolute. Collapse became meaningless. The future shrank into a cliff rather than a curve. This shift did not happen because it was more accurate, but because it was more useful. A population that fears the end is easier to motivate through threat and promise. Do this now. There is no time. This is your only chance. Finality sharpens control. This fear also discourages deeper questioning. If reality ends here, then asking what lies beyond feels pointless or dangerous. People are taught to stay focused on the immediate, the measurable, the practical. Questions about continuity, cycles, or transformation are dismissed as distractions. And so awareness stays shallow, contained within the boundaries of survival. The irony is that fear of endings does not protect people from loss. It makes loss more traumatic. When endings are seen as annihilation rather than transition, every change feels like a threat. Anxiety becomes constant. Grief becomes overwhelming. Meaning becomes fragile. A reality framed by finality is a reality lived under pressure. This is why narratives of apocalypse, collapse, and total destruction are so effective. They trigger deep inherited fear. They narrow attention. They reduce perspective. In that state, people seek authority, certainty, and reassurance, often from the very systems that benefit from the fear. This chapter is not denying that things end, forms end, structures end, phases end, civilizations end, but endings do not have to mean erasure. In nature, endings are almost always transformations, matter changes state. Energy moves form. Life recycles itself endlessly. Finality is the exception, not the rule. If reality does not truly end, then fear loses its strongest weapon. Urgency softens. Perspective widens. People begin to ask not, how do I avoid the end, but how do I live knowing change is inevitable? That question produces wisdom rather than panic. This is why the end is always framed as terrifying, because a population that fears the end will cling to the present and cling to those who claim to protect it. But once the fear of endings dissolves, something far more powerful takes its place: understanding. And that prepares the mind for the final realization that what we call the end may not be destruction at all, but movement. That is where the story must conclude. The most unsettling realization is not that reality ends, but that it moves on quietly, without asking for permission, without ceremony, and often without warning. Reality does not announce transitions the way humans expect. There is no final chapter written in bold letters, no universal signal that says this is the end. Instead, reality shifts its form while people are still debating what is real. By the time the change is undeniable, it has already happened. This is why endings are so misunderstood. People imagine them as moments of destruction, collapse, or disappearance. But in every system we observe, biological, ecological, cosmic endings are movements, not erasures. A star does not vanish, it changes state. A season does not die, it transforms. Even death at the cellular level is a process of redistribution rather than annihilation. And yet, when it comes to reality itself, humans cling to the idea of finality. If reality did not begin here, then it cannot truly end here either. What ends are configurations, structures, expressions. What continues is the underlying process that allows reality to take form at all. This is the truth ancient cultures encoded into stories of cycles and ages, not as comfort but as orientation, knowing that reality moves on, changes how one lives inside it. When people believe this world is all there is, they cling desperately to form. Identity hardens. Fear intensifies. Control becomes paramount. But when reality is understood as transitional, attention shifts from possession to participation. Meaning is no longer extracted from permanence, but from alignment with change. This is why remembering this truth feels destabilizing at first. It removes the illusion of fixed ground. It asks people to let go of certainty without offering replacement dogma. And in that space, fear can arise not because something bad is happening, but because something familiar is dissolving. Yet beneath that fear is relief. The relief of knowing that endings are not personal failures or cosmic punishments. They are movements within a much larger process. What feels like loss from one perspective may be continuation from another. And what feels like collapse may be transition disguised as chaos. This does not mean suffering is meaningless or that responsibility disappears. On the contrary, it deepens responsibility. When reality is understood as ongoing, actions ripple forward rather than terminating at an imagined end. Choices matter not because time is short, but because participation is continuous. The most powerful shift happens quietly. People stop asking how to stop change and begin asking how to move with it consciously. They stop demanding guarantees and start cultivating awareness. They stop living as if they are at the mercy of reality and begin recognizing that they are inside it, always have been. This is the ending most stories never reach. Not destruction, not salvation, but continuation. Reality moving on, reshaping itself, inviting awareness to meet it without fear. And here is the final shock. Reality does not need you to understand it to continue, but understanding it changes how you experience every moment inside it. Reality didn't begin here. It won't end here, but you are here now inside a moment that matters precisely because it is part of something far larger than itself. And once that is understood, the fear of endings loses its grip because nothing essential was ever truly at risk of disappearing.